Hey everybody, Riot Mort here with Riot Kent, and we are here for the patch 11.16 patch rundown. Now, this is the first patch since Dawn of Heroes launched. Dawn of Heroes launched, though, 3 weeks ago, so it's been a long patch also. Thankfully, though, the meta's been pretty good. Kent, you've got a better idea than I do since you just hit Challenger. How you feeling about the meta right now?
Yeah, it feels good. There's a lot of things that can win. There are some comps that are too strong, and there's like a lot of comps that still can't work, which this upcoming patch can address. But overall, it's like feels like a really flexible meta. Lots of different openers work, lots of different mid games, and then final comps are you can play wide trades, you can play vertical trades. It feels good, and I kind of like tried a little bit of everything on my way to Challenger. So like I've at least played everything a little bit. So yeah, there's a lot to play right now. It's a good patch, in my opinion.
Sweet. Well, our goal for this patch is not to mess with that. The last thing we want to do is throw things up in the air and just have a terrible patch right after this. So what you're going to see is a lot of small changes. Honestly, if your reaction to anything you see is, that's not going to do much, then good, we did it. That's kind of the point. But yeah, so let's jump into it and talk about what we're doing. All right, first off, we have the only big trait change is Legionnaire. I think Legionnaire has basically been a non-existent trait past two. Maybe you run two for a Draven or even like a Riven, something like that. But the reality is the attack speed's nice, but the way their heal worked, where you had to cast a spell and then it was your next auto, was a little weird. Didn't work on a lot of champions like Kale or even Yasuo. And I had really bad interactions with Hurricane. So we reworked it so that basically they just get Omnivamp, and so it's the same amount of attack speed, but Omnivamp. This is a pretty big buff to Legionnaire, especially ones that weren't really benefiting it before, like Kale. I think Yasuo and Riven are going to benefit from this a lot. But yeah, hopefully we should see Legionnaire start to be more of a valid option with this.
Yeah, and hopefully this opens up like itemization for the comps that already exist, like Yasuo and Riven, who are already played, but they tend to build healing. Not always, but like, you can opt into healing. This is more like pushing towards like maybe you don't need healing, maybe you can just go for more damage, or you can go for a different kind of defensive. And for Kale, for example, instead of building Hand of Justice, you can go for, triple offensive or like a Guardian Angel and then just two more damage items so you can actually use that true damage. So like kind of opens up the way to play the Legionnaire comp and the units within the comp.
Yep. A lot of the changes you're going to see from here on out too, or might be like responses to this. But the other thing I'll note is like you're not going to see a change to Kale because, for example, we don't want to double nerf where the trait gets really powerful and the champion gets even more powerful. So this should make someone like Kale stronger, but that's why you're not going to see other adjustments. Again, we're going to try to be very light, not really mess with the meta, and this is probably the biggest change in the patch. So
Oh yeah, and just to also say, like the interaction with this between with this and Callista and Draven, we want to change it in a way where they can still benefit from it very well.
yep,
Callista will still throw that spear. If it kills people, it'll deal a lot of damage, and she'll still heal for a lot from that spear. So we didn't want to take that away. So
yep,
Omnivamp was a way kind of like to fix the problem, but also not change it for the existing champions.
true. All right. Next up is Nocturne, and this is a lot of text, but I'm going to boil it down really simply first, which is basically what we're doing here is giving ourselves balance levers. Nocturne has kind of been problematic in the sense that he's awful at 1 star. You get him from a box, you're like, ugh, I don't really want to run that. Okay to bad at 2 star, and then holy crap is he amazing at 3 star, like way too good. And we didn't really have any levers to try to adjust that. So by changing some of the numbers around, now we can kind of tune it a little better. And so the end result here is basically that Nocturne 1 should be a bit better, Nocturne 2 is a little better, and Nocturne 3 is a little worse. That sound about right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Basically, the only lever that changed in the past when you scaled him up was his base stats with his AD and HP, and then the spell heal percentage, or in the attack speed buff. But like those were all negligible. Didn't really give us enough balance. So balance levers. So like by putting base damage on it, we can actually tune it in a way where we can adjust the levels as needed based on how powerful each star level is at each stage in the game.
Yep. The only other big change to note here is with the spell AD ratio going down quite a bit, Deathblade's not quite as good an item, so Infinity Edge becomes a little better, but other than that, it shouldn't really change his itemization path or anything like that.
Yep.
Cool. All right, on the forecast side, first off, we have Galio. Galio has kind of been underperforming a little bit, so we're buffing him a bit, so better spell healing, and his spell lasts a little longer, so he can be tanky even longer. This should make Galio a little bit more of a premier 4-cost tank than he was before. And I think this one's going to get some laughs, but 3-star Galio was outperforming a little bit if you had the right items. If you've ever faced an Archangel Galio 3, it's a little more damage than we were comfortable with. So Galio 3 gets a slight nerf here. Anything to add there?
Archangel Galio 3, Mort hit that in one of our playtest games. It was basically like a Garen 3 3 hex AoE that just wipes the board. It was wild. But Galio faces kind of like he's in a really weird spot. Like an unitemized Galio is kind of weak. And itemized Galio is pretty good, but at the same time, like Aurelia is kind of within the same comp and kind of is outshining Galio. Like it's close enough where like you don't know if you want to spend 12 gold on this Galio. So then we think he needs these buffs to be like a 4-cost. It's 12 gold. He should be like the main tank of the Sentinel comp. So these buffs are warranted.
Yep. And just as before, we don't want to overkill it. So if Galio needs more after this, fine. But this is where we're going to start. Karma. Karma, if you have one thing to say bad about the launch, it's we messed up Karma. That last nerf we put out with Karma really shouldn't have happened. Karma has probably been the weakest 4-cost this whole patch, which is really a shame to see because Karma was a fun champion. So to start with, we're just going to undo that last nerf that we did on PvE. So this puts Karma back to where she was on live. Still has the Dawnbringer nerfs and stuff like this, but hopefully this bumps up Karma quite a bit so that she can reach those kill thresholds she needs to.
Yeah, and you know, with so many like Bloodthirster users in the meta, if Karma continues to struggle, we'll of course keep an eye on that and like give Karma more love if she needs it. But you'll see later on, like you know, some items are getting changes and some other Dawnbringer champions are getting or Garen's getting a buff. So yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say the items was the other big one, so we don't want to again over buff here. So, all right, why don't you explain Lucian?
Yeah, so Lucian launched with a very confusing interaction with on-attack items like Hurricane, Shiv, Rageblade, Titans. Like, does this work? Does it not work? It works with Cannoneer. Why doesn't it work with these items? And so we kind of wanted to be able to like keep it balanced because if he fires like 20 shots and he like gets 20 stacks of Titans right away or Rageblade right away, it's OP. But we also didn't want it to be, you know, on the other side where it's like if it doesn't work, it's just really confusing and it's not straightforward whether or not it works. So what we did was we made it so every other shot from his ability now counts as an attack, kind of like he's firing 2 shots, but that's 1 attack because he has 2 guns. So it'll now work with these items. It'll trigger, but it's only every other shot. It also means that Cannoneer will trigger every other shot instead of like every 10 shots rather than every 5 shots the way it does now. So it's kind of like it buffs certain item builds and it's slightly nerfing the Cannoneer build. And he's strong in the meta right now too, so it should be like a overall slight nerf.
Yeah, overall, this is definitely one that should make it more interesting to itemize Lucian. Do you want to go like a Pikachu Lucian build with Shiv? Do you want to go Hurricane? I will say, if anything changes before the launch of this patch and this rundown, I think it's going to be Lucian. If you've been watching my stream at all, some of those Lucian builds have been pretty insane, especially with Hurricane. But again, we do want to make this less confusing. That's the big goal here. And so all these items should now just work. And so we should be trying to balance Lucian around these items working.
Yeah, and it is a slight buff to have like flexibility with item builds too. If you slam items early and you can play, you're open to playing a Lucian now if you hit a Hurricane early game. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Cool. All right, on the item side, one big one here. Quicksilver, instead of 12 seconds of duration, it's now 15. Reckoning fights have been longer in general, and so this item has basically not seen play because you don't get the damage from it. So we're just trying to increase its value a little bit. Again, nothing too crazy here, but if you want the CC immunity, this should help Quicksilver a bit.
Yep.
Cool. All right, next up we have a lot of Radiant item changes. So these are all listed under large, but we sort of wanted to put them all in the same category. They're not all large themselves, but generally the idea here is Radiant items have been out one patch. It's time to squeeze them together. Nerf the overpowered ones, buff the underpowered ones. And so you're going to see 11 items here have gotten changed. I'll run through each page, and then Kent, you can comment on each page if you see anything worth talking about. Blue buff. That's an item that has a pretty narrow audience, and even when you have it on the right person, like a Teemo or a Karma, meh. So we're giving it 10% more ability power. Gargoyle Stoneplate, same thing, decent tank item, has that health regen, just not quite enough armor and MR, buffing it up a bit. Giant Slayer, good item when it works, but when it doesn't work, it's pretty bad. So we're buffing up its bad case a little bit so that you don't feel as bad when you're hitting something small. 40% damage amp, still pretty good. That's still better than a Hodge, for example. And then Gens's Rageblade was actually the worst item by a long shot. So that one got the biggest buff, and now it has a radiant bonus of 30% attack speed. So it kind of reminds me of Shadow Zeke's now, where it's like you get an initial burst of attack speed, except now you can then keep ramping up even more.
Yeah. And I know some of you are looking at the numbers for Ginsu's Rageblade and you're like, holy shit, that's nuts. But I think like the item is really difficult to make use of right now. Like there are some units that can use it in very niche cases, and even then it's not that amazing. So like we kind of wanted to give it the initial ramp. You get three auto attacks worth of attack speed before that helps you continue to ramp up more. So like we think the item needs it.
Yep.
Long story short, yeah.
Cool. Next up, Ionic Spark. Ionic Spark has been one of the strongest items in the game. It's fine, we like it that way, but it probably doesn't need that large amount of HP regen also. So we've decided to keep the Spark, the hit, the shock, but a little less HP regen. Jeweled Gauntlet is another item that's been underperforming a bit. You can say it's partially due to the AP meta, but this is also specifically to help buff some of the AP users that can use it. Things like Vel'Koz, Karma. So Jeweled Gauntlet gets a bit of a buff. Same with Rabadon's Death Cap. Same thing. We're giving that a very slight buff here. So Rabadon's Death Cap should be a little scarier. And then finally, Locket of the Iron Solari. These items, this item's been kind of struggling to find a good spot to use. And you would think giving 7 people on your team 600 health could be pretty good. But especially with Volibear existing, it can also be pretty tough to use. So we are going to buff that item quite a bit here.
Yep. Nothing much to add here. Just these are, there are some Karma items, like Garen item that's buffed in here, so it should help that comp rise up in the meta.
Yeah. I think the one thing to note is there are going to be people that'll say, hey, all these AP items are weak because it's an AD meta. By buffing these AP items, are you not worried it'll become an AP meta? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. It is a very AD meta, but there are a lot of AP comps cap out a lot higher already anyways. So I think like these just bring the AP items up to par for items against items like Archangel Staff, and like Shojin is one of the premier items right now that people would just like to build. And so I don't think it'll shift the meta in any way that dramatically with these item changes. I think it'll like remain similar, and the weak comps you'll be able to build it if you don't, you'll be able to play these items basically if you don't hit the ones that are currently strong already right now.
Makes sense. Cool. And the last 3, Redemption, another item that's been pretty insane. 35% of your missing health restore is really good on tanky comps, A-Bomb, for example. So this is going to be a pretty big nerf, actually. I think one of the bigger nerfs of all of them. But again, 35% to a giant AoE radius is just, it's a lot of healing on that item that it probably doesn't need quite that much. Static Shiv, still 8 jumps. It's just a bit more damage. Try this item out on Lucian if you want. Still pretty good on Akshan. This is an item that should be pretty decent. And then Sunfire has been another one that's secretly been very good. Or maybe not secretly. I don't know. I haven't played that much. But same thing. We want to keep the burn. The burn is kind of the exciting part of the item. So we're just going to nerf the HP regen a bit.
Yep. On Redemption, this is a really big nerf to the HP restore, but like the item's power is just also within the AoE damage reduction. And especially if you can get it like somewhere in the center board where it hits your front and your backline, or maybe you put it on Abomination where it can hit your front line and your backline, that's still a very, very valuable item. So like even though the nerf is pretty large, I think the item will end up still in a really good spot.
Yep. Cool. All right, that's it for large changes. Now there are a lot of small changes, and again, for us, the difference between a large and a small change here is a small change probably won't affect the meta much. These are just nudges to bring things closer together. We still expect these champions to do as well as they were doing before. Very slight touches. So, on the trait change, Abomination has been kind of the premier tank. Very flexible. You can play it in any comp, but it kind of scales out of control. It just keeps getting stronger and stronger as the late game goes on, which is kind of the point, but a little too much. So we're bringing down that stage scaling just a bit, so it won't be quite as good. Hellion 2 and 4, this is mostly to open up more openers. Hellion 2 and 4 openers get to be a little bit stronger. Also might incentivize you to actually be willing to play something like a 2 Hellion or a 4 Hellion in the late game with a Teemo, make that a little bit more appealing. This is not meant to buff 6 or 8 Hellion. Those comps are doing just fine. Ranger 2 is another one that's been underperforming. If you get like a Varus and Vayne opener, that's really bad and it shouldn't be. This also helps some late game Aphelios, Akshan, Ranger 2 if you want to go that route. So should open up some options there. And finally, Skirmisher 6. Skirmisher 6 is really good on like stage 3, maybe stage 4, but then it falls off a cliff. And that's kind of the point, but just a little bit to keep it more competitive there. It's getting 1 more AD per second.
Yep. One thing on A-bomb, it's a lot of players. I've been seeing a lot of players drop down from 4 A-bomb to 3 A-bomb in the late game because the stage scaling helps the A-bomb stay very tanky and still use its items very well. And so that's kind of problematic. We want the stage scaling to help the drop off not feel as dramatic, but it shouldn't be to the point where you purposely want to go down a trait level because that's already so strong. So yeah, that's why we're tuning the stage scaling there. I think maybe even before patch launch, we may do a little bit more tuning on Abomination because the tank is just so tanky. But yeah, that's why we went with stage scaling on Abomination.
Cool. On the 1-cost side, Leona is getting some starting mana. We're just helping Leona get that first cast off. This is mostly to help an itemless Leona, especially in the mid to late game. So an itemless Leona will get 1 more spell cast pretty early. Doesn't help with repeat casts, but we do want it to help Leona, especially some of those other openers we talked about also, so it's not all Sentinel Skirmisher openers. Speaking of which, Olaf overperforming just a little bit, and we just really want, like, we're happy with Olaf. He's a fun champion, especially in the early game. He's serving his purpose as a 1-cost. Just want to lightly tap him down, so 5 less health per auto. And then Vayne, like I said, Vayne is probably the champion that has suffered the most. Kind of been a really weak 1-cost this patch. So she gets 5 more AD, which I know doesn't seem like a lot, but this is also on top of the Ranger buff and some of her Radiant items being buffed. So hopefully this can get Vayne to be a little bit more playable.
Yep. Just the itemless Leona has not sometimes struggles to cast, and so we just want to make sure she at least gets 1 cast off, can tank for a little bit before she dies.
Cool. All right. 2 costs. There's actually 6 2 costs to change. Aurelia, like we talked about, that Sentinel Skirmisher opener is just really, really good. And with the Legionnaire buff coming in, she's going to be even better now. So we're just bringing down her AD just a little bit. This should also kind of nerf her like Bloodthirster builds, things like that. So she'll still be decent, but trying to bring her down just a little bit. Sejuani, same thing. We went with a light nerf for a launch. She's still doing really, really well, especially in Nightspringer. So just want to nerf that spell just a little bit. Set has been underperforming. We don't want to turn him back into, One Punch Man doing way too much damage for a 2-cost. But he does feel more like a tank than a damage dealer, so we're giving him the tank baseline armor and MR stats. And then finally on this page, Thresh. I mean, Thresh is fun, but let's be real. I'm not sure a Thresh 2 with items or a Thresh 3 without items should be one-shotting a Lucian 2. So we're bringing that number down quite a bit. This is listed under small changes because, Thresh isn't meant to be a damage dealer. His utility is still just as high. It's still a big 4-second stun that he pulls you in. But it's just not going to one-shot champions quite as easily.
Yeah, and just to keep in mind, like, Thresh has Forgotten. So with 4 Forgotten, it's one-shotting the backliner. And, units, like, even if you try to protect it, the units will move up and Thresh will often hit his target. And so he'll still stun for a long time. It's still a really good unit, just won't be one-shotting things. And on the Aurelia front, Aurelia is not only just super tanky serving that role, but she's also dealing a lot of damage and being able to, like, end fights kind of 1v3 by herself. So by tuning down the AD there, it prevents her from as easily doing that.
Yep. Cool. 2 more 2 costs. Tristana, the bane of my existence. Oh, Tristana. We did talk about how Hellion 2 and 4 got buffed, and that's intentional, but Tristana herself, we still want her to be good, as much as I may personally despise this champion. But players are having fun with her, and so we're just pulling a little bit of the attack speed out of her spell. And so again, this, if you look at like a 4 Hellion Tristana build, maybe it's, a little weaker, but 6 Hellion Tristana will be quite a bit weaker. hopefully pushing you to do other builds like Cannoneer as well, or maybe just not, stick with a Tristana to blow up everyone's backline. So, and then Varus, another Ranger we talked about who's been kind of underperforming. So Varus gets 5 AD to make him just a little bit more threatening.
Yeah, and in general, these two cost changes help with the openers too. Like the brawler opener is still good, but not going to be as like amazing with Sejuani with a 4 Nightbringer opener or like a brawler opener. And then Varus, Rangers become a better opener, or like Redeemed is a pretty good opener already, but this helps Varus as an item holder choice if you want to go an AD comp after starting out Redeemed. There's opening up options there.
Yep. On to 3 costs. Lee Sin, fun champion, very powerful. I got beat today by an Archangel Jeweled Gauntlet Lee Sin. It was pretty crazy to see. But specifically, Lee Sin 3, little too much damage for how much easier 3 costs have been to hit. So pulling him down just a bit. Riven and Yasuo, I'm just going to cover real quick together. Their 3 stars have been nerfed, and I could see, by the way, before we launch, maybe Riven gets hit even at 2-star. Riven's very good. But this is mostly to account for the Legionnaire buff. This is less about nerfing the champions and more about, counteracting that Legionnaire buff, because these 2 champs especially are benefiting from that Legionnaire buff. And then finally, Lulu has constantly been kind of an underperformer. So we're just buffing her a little bit. Her auto attacks do well, so if you're running her in Hellion, she should be a little bit of extra damage. And her ally buff will last 1 second longer. So,
yeah, on Lulu, just her early game, you never kind of really want to play a Lulu. She's like not great, and you hit a 3 cost Lulu, and you're like, not really worth it. But then now that she does some more damage, it's more worth running because fights are longer, she can auto attack more, etc. And then on Riven and Yasuo, like I could even see Yasuo 2 maybe getting a small nerf in compensation for the Legionnaire buff. But yeah, that's stuff that we will talk about before the patch launches.
Yep. All right, on the 4 cost, really silly, but Aphelios 3 is kind of underperforming compared to where we want him. Aphelios 3 is good, but honestly not quite where a 4 cost should be. So we are buffing Aphelios 3, super minor. And Rel has continued to be sort of the quintessential 4 cost. Little too good, so minus 50 HP. Again, we're not trying to ruin her identity. We still want her to be very good. You should be excited to get a Rel, just a little less excited.
Yeah, I mean, Rel always casts, like with those tags, she's tanky enough to basically always cast at 1 star. But then if now with a small nerf, you can like focus fire her and take her down before she casts. And that she won't always just go off.
Yep. On the 5 cost side, Akshan has actually been doing okay. 2-star Akshan is quite good. 1-star Akshan, not as much. So we're opening up Akshan just to make him a little catch up to some of the other 5 costs. With some more attack speed on his spell, especially at 1-star, a little bit at 2-star, nothing crazy. Garen, kind of okay, not quite as good as he was pre-Dawn of Heroes, but we are opening up his 2-star damage a bit here. This goes up to 35%. This should open up some crazy builds if you want to try like a Death Cap, i.e. Jeweled Gauntlet Garen. Give that a try. Maybe Gangplank is back, but that should be good. Gwen, same thing. Gwen has been a really good champion, just underperforming very slightly. So what we're going to do is let her steal 1 more armor and MR per snip. Should just be a very slight buff. Again, that's the level we have to be at this point. We have to do very light touches. And then finally, Heimerdinger 1, I think, is probably the most egregious thing that's in here. Like, this could almost be put under large change, even though it's a small number. Because Heimerdinger 1 does stabilize you a little too well right now. So we're going to nerf the base of the spell to 400. We still want 2-star Heimerdinger to be that big, exciting spellcaster. That's not changing, but you have to hit that 2-star Heimer. 1-star, just a little too good.
Yeah, seeing too much of like people sacking down to 20 HP, hitting a 1-star Heimer, then stabilizing, and then top 4ing, which is kind of just really egregious. But if you hit a 2-star Heimerdinger, you should be able to top 4 if you play well, you position well, etc. And then on Garen, the fact that he can kill people more takes more advantage of Victorious, so you can see him like dunk, and so it's kind of fun. It's just like a meme crazy build, but like try it out. It's pretty exciting to watch that cast go down and melt the teams.
Cool. Item side, Rabadon's Death Cap, same as the Radiant version. We're buffing it up just a little bit. Try to help out some of the AP users a little bit, so it should be a better item. Redemption, little too good. So we're just, again, nerfing the healing on it just a little bit from 20 to 18. Very small nerf. And then Sunfire, this is a really tiny nerf, but Sunfire is just a little too good in the early game and gives you a lot of power from stage 2 and stage 3. So we're not actually nerfing the damage per tick. It's still 2.5% per tick. You just get less ticks. So if your tank dies early, the ticks are going to stop a little sooner. But Sunfire, I imagine this will still be good, just a little less good.
Yeah, with Sunfire, if you can manage to position in a way to kill the tank early, with Sunfire, like then it's not as punishing for your team, and so that should weaken it, weaken the item a little bit.
Finally, bug fixes. Nunu will now cast his increased attack range when he has Radiant Rapid Fire Cannon. Oops, that's fixed now. Zephyr and Radiant Zephyr can no longer hit the same target. That was an issue before. It's fixed. Lucian's channel is no longer interrupted by taunts. Taunts aren't supposed to interrupt spells, so that's fixed. And Radiant Zephyr's attack speed buff will now be properly removed at the end of each combat, just dealing with a very weird Leduc Extreme style case there. So
thank you, Leduc.
Yep. All right, so that is going to do it for this patch. Again, the goal of the patch is honestly to keep it good, just open up a little more and bring some stuff in. But yeah, Kent, anything else to add?
No, I'm excited to see how this patch turns out. Opening up more ways to play. Hopefully, see some more chaos, some more karmas, and yeah, should be good.
Cool. Yeah, especially as competitive starts to heat up as well. We want to see the meta get to a really good spot. Hopefully we can go into Worlds with a really good meta. That'd be pretty solid. But yeah, keep us feedback. And as always with this patch rundown, this is happening. You'll be watching this on Sunday. The official patch notes go up Tuesday, so I'll announce on Tuesday if anything changed between this rundown and that. But yeah, that'll do it. And then the patch goes live Wednesday your time. So, all right, that's going to do it for us. On behalf of everyone on the TFT team, thanks. Enjoy Dawn of Heroes, and take it easy.